Good, good, good. I am battling my way through the projects that you guys are turning in, and I'm liking what I'm seeing so far. It looks like you guys are getting the hang of what we're going for. That's terrific. It's not a fast process, grading upwards of 7,500 projects, but I'm getting there. So it will be posted, fret ye not. Again, pay very close attention to the dates on FSO in terms of when this stuff is due. And I'm hoping what you're starting to see is that there is a trend where your skill checks, all three of them each week, your skill checks are all due on the same day. So you got to get those all done. You can do them and turn them in as you go. That's usually a good idea, but you can wait till that last day and finally submit them all. And then just a few days afterwards, that's when the weekly turn-in takes place. And again, that weekly turn-in is basically a culmination of each of those skill checks, what you added to your utility belt of knowledge with all these cool accessories that you're gaining with each class. So again, how many of you guys watched the turn-in procedure video? How many of you guys watched that? Oh, good. A lot of you watched it. Did you find that to be helpful? And that's exactly why I put that stuff on there, because some of the things we do are very, very technical. And although I can demonstrate it for you and you can write it down, sometimes it's kind of hard to get all that. That's why I make a video for the particularly challenging things. So please watch those, because there's a reason I make them and there's a reason I post them there. Believe it or not, it has nothing to do with my salary. I know, we'll pay him extra for making videos if I can get the students to watch them. Yeah, no. That's me just trying to help you out. So that's why that stuff is there. Also, make sure that you are reading the instructions for these things, because there's a lot of information in there. And I put it in there to help you, because my whole goal is for you to be successful. And I think nothing makes you want to be successful like being successful to begin with. And then you sort of build on that. It's sort of like a freight train or an avalanche. Everything just kind of picks up. When things are going well, you want to continue to do well. So hopefully that will be something that you guys keep doing and keep working on. Okay, so today, lecture 5, we're going to be talking about all kinds of fun stuff. We are going to be delving into some processes and ideas about how to work faster, but not by working harder, but by working smarter, because there's definitely a difference between that. When you stay up all night and don't go to bed, there's definitely diminishing returns. Your work starts to suffer and it goes, to the garbage. Anyway, so you don't want, the answer isn't always don't sleep. Sometimes you just got to be smarter about how you're looking at or approaching the problems you face. So what we're going to do today, again, is talk about some new tools that can speed stuff up for us and make things go faster, like the mirroring tool. And we're going to delve into some things like hotkeys and marking menus and fun stuff like that that can really help us out in terms of speeding our workflow. And everyone's workflow is different. So we just try to show you some interesting things and ideas, and you can incorporate that, and that'll help you get the job done a little bit quicker, which is always the goal. The quality is the given. It's got to be fantastic, but if we can do it more quickly, that's always to our advantage. All right, but before we delve into that, a new vocabulary thing, a nice little periwinkle vocabulary thing called deleting your history. Deleting the history is something that we do periodically while we're modeling, because basically while you are working, each time you do something, Maya sort of writes it down and records it. It's almost like there's somebody doing your biography or something, the biography of the object you're building. And Maya, being a computer or an application, they love to record stuff. And what happens is, as you're doing work, as you're using tools, Maya is generating what we call the history of that object. And the history, in most cases, is not to your advantage on your geometry. There are some instances where history is actually very helpful, and hopefully I'll get a chance to demonstrate an instance where history is helpful. But the overwhelming majority of the time, periodically what we need to do is get rid of that history, because it's unnecessary extraneous information that we're making Maya remember. And in terms of tools not functioning, in terms of files crashing, a lot of that can be directly led to the issue of a huge buildup of history on your geometry. So as I said, typically when I'm working, I will try to save my files every 15 minutes. So I'll be working on something, a model of a dog, and then 15 minutes later it's dog 1, and then 15 minutes after that dog 2, and I just keep saving. And then one of the things that I'll do is delete history before I save, so I'm sort of cleaning the model. These are good house cleaning tips in terms of keeping your file robust and functional and have a lot less issues. And again, one of the great practices of saving every 15 minutes or so is if your computer fails, if the file crashes, if something horrible happens, if the state you live in is completely destroyed, you've only lost 15 minutes worth of work. You can go back and get that previously saved file and you're good. If you work for 4 hours, 8 hours, and then Maya crashes on you, you have nothing. Does that make sense? That is a huge loss. So we work in a technology-driven field, applications which are operating at the cutting edge of their capacities. We need to be smart. We need to keep saving. We need to delete history. We'll talk about something else called freezing transformations. Again, always good ideas to keep that file running well, cleanly, happily, because then everything just goes more smoothly. So let's take a look at how do I delete history on my geometry. So quick demonstration. Let's say I have there we go. Let's say I've got an object here, and incidentally, in the very creation of an object, there is history associated with it. If you select that, you can modify the inputs of that object and change its behavior or appearance. So that's kind of a cool thing. But let's take a look at adding history. Let's say I use my insert edge loop tool. I throw a couple of edge loops on there, where I want them to be. And then what happens is when you select the object in object mode, oh yeah, look, here's all the things that I was doing. And like I said, this buildup of history, it accumulates very, very quickly. So you've got to clear it out periodically. So the steps for deleting your history are select the geometry in object mode, and then go to Edit, Delete by Type, History. And literally what that will do is erase the history. Completely gone. Now you might be thinking, oh, whoops, that means I'm not going to be able to undo. I just destroyed my ability to undo. No, not at all, because if I hit undo, the history comes right back on. Those are all savable functions. So it's not like you lose the ability to go backwards in time. Just like share, you can still do it. Question? Absolutely. You select the geometry in object mode. You have to select it, and it's got to be object mode. Edit, delete by type, history. And it literally wipes the history right off the geometry, and now it is cleaner, lighter, and more efficient, and way less likely to have problems. Yep, a buildup of history is definitely problematic. So we do want to do that, like I said, at a minimum about every 15 minutes. I'll delete history and save my file. All right, so again, saving your history will definitely save your bacon. And who doesn't like bacon?
A vegetarian?
You know what? That's true. Vegetarians don't like bacon. And I am so cool with that because that's more bacon for me. That's totally fine. All right, so let's look at some model smarter, not necessarily harder. So something I'd like you to do when you're building objects is try to take a look at what you're building and look for elements of bilateral symmetry or repetition in aspects of any given thing that you're building. Because what that means is you can build just part of something and then make several copies of that, and it actually speeds up the process. So what you can do is build just a portion of something, and then we can use some really fun tools that will allow us to sort of duplicate it around and recreate the entire object from just part of it, which is, again, a tremendous time savings. And one of the reasons we really appreciate machines, because that aspect of how they're used is very helpful in saving time. All right. Now, one of the tools we can use for this is the mirror tool. Actually, it used to be mirror geometry. Now it's just mirror. But basically what it does is it takes what's on one side of an object and sort of duplicates it, and if we want it to, we'll attach it to the other side of the same object. So we only have to build half of it, which is super cool. And again, when I say bilateral symmetry, what I mean is it's the same on both sides. And what you will see is that with a lot of objects, I try not to say things like all, if I can avoid it, but in a lot of objects, we have a lot of symmetry. We are sort of a symmetrical kind of species, and the stuff that we build, for the most part, is symmetrical. And a lot of the organic stuff, just by creation and its design, and its simplicity and functionality, that tends to be exhibit bilateral symmetry as well. So just look for wherever you have that, and again, tremendous time savings because you only have to make half of something. I mean, how many of you guys have ever drawn something and tried to make the two sides look the same? And how hard is that, right? That's brutal, right? So we love the machines because we can just duplicate it. So yay, we can do that in Maya too. So what you have to do is take a look at whatever it is you're building and try to figure out, oh, you know what? The front of this thing looks like the back of this thing. That's true. I've got this opening up here in the front, and I've got this little handle, and there's a locking mechanism there, so I can open that up and get the little plastic bin out. But this thing, for the most part, exhibits a great deal of bilateral symmetry, and I could use that to duplicate the shape of it, and then maybe I can go in on one side and build the specific elements that exist only there. So again, it's going to save you a lot of time in the long run when you utilize those kinds of ideas. So you ready to use the mirror tool? Oh yeah, here we go. So I'm going to show you how to use the mirror tool. There's really just one question, or two questions, I guess, in terms of using the mirror tool that you have to figure out, and that is, where is my geometry and where do I want to duplicate it? Because what you want to do is figure out which side or where the geometry is, and then where do I need to send it? And then everything starts to work super easy. So this is an activity, so we want to make sure that we set our project to the activity file folder. So let us take a quick foray over there. File, set project. I choose my activity file folder. And then I go to File, Open Scene, and I got my mirror geometry activity. All right, and that opens up. And in terms of my mirror geometry activity, something I wanted to kind of point out is if you take a look at my reference for the mailbox that I'm building here, you'll notice that in my front view, it's just a plain old blue mailbox with snow on the ground. When you look on my side view, I found a really cool R2-D2 version of the mailbox. Aside from visually being more interesting to have R2-D2 painted on the outside of that, do you think that affects my ability to model this thing, the fact that the surface color is different from one image to the other? No, it doesn't make any difference whatsoever, because as a modeler, we're looking shape and form. Does that make sense? So, I mean, ultimately, I'm going to have to decide which one am I actually building. Am I building the beat-up, run-of-the-mill, on-the-street one, or do I want to make the R2-D2 one? But that's when we get into texturing. So that's a whole other level. So don't be afraid of using reference images that are not necessarily exactly the same, but it'll still help you build the thing. Does that make sense? Okay. So just things to think about, because we're going to start getting into how do I find my own reference, what makes good reference, how do I bring those images into Maya so that I can model what I want to model, not just the stuff you want, Steve. So, but let's get into this mirror geometry tool. All right, now just to make life easy, I'm going to hide this image so that we're just concentrating on what we're doing and what we're working with, which is the geometry. So I'm going to go to my show menu and uncheck image planes, and then that way I don't see image planes, but I see the other elements. And you'll notice that I can still see image planes over here because they have their own show menu. So you can hide and show different things in different windows. But let's get back over here and let's work on this mirror geometry tool. Now, in terms of the mirror geometry tool, as I said, there's only two questions you have to ask yourself. Where is your geometry and where are you trying to send it? So in looking at this piece of mailbox, I determined that my mailbox is in positive Z. And I know it's in Z because here's that blue arrow, right? And blue means Z. So that's where it is. The other thing that I'll notice is it's in positive, and I know that because I see the arrow physically. There's no arrow over here, so this is negative Z. Does that make sense? Because what I'm trying to get you guys out of the habit of is thinking left is blue, right is red, because that's not all true. It's absolutely perspective. Does that make sense? We think we're in the northern hemisphere because that's where we live. Does that make sense? There's no reason why people in Australia wouldn't say, well, I'm in the northern hemisphere. You guys are on the bottom. Who says our side of the earth is up? Right? Completely perspective. Anyway, point being, you got to rely on your axis of orientation here in the corner, which will tell you based on the universe that you are commanding what's your orientation. But I can look here as well and see, this mailbox is in positive Z. So when I want to mirror it, what I'm going to do is send it into negative Z. Make sense? Okay, so step one for mirroring geometry, you must select the geometry and it's got to be in object mode. So make sure you do that. Yes?
Every time I open, it opens it up. The computer opens it up for me, but it opens the wrong thing I select.
Are you using the mirror geometry exercise or activity?
I'm trying to open up that activity.
Okay, well hang on one second. Let me demonstrate it and I'll come back and make sure yours is working, okay? All right, so you select the geometry in object mode and then you go to mesh and you'll see mirror. And of course we want to go to the options box because that's where we tell it where it's going. If I open up the options box and I am mirroring into Z, so you choose your axis on here in terms of where you want it to go. I want it to go to Z. But in this instance, I want it to go into negative. So what you want to do is make sure that the mirror direction is set for the thing you want. So I want it to go to negative Z. So what it's going to do is mirror it over this way. All right. And then the other thing is, do I want it to combine with the original? And there's that little checkbox down there. Because in some instances, you want to make a duplicate of something, but you don't necessarily want them to attach. So again, it's a what do I need it to do thing. But in this instance, I do want it to actually connect. So then I go to mirror. Boop. And then just like that, I get another copy for free. And it's attached, which is super nice. Now here's where I'm hoping, yep, and it did it, terrific. Sometimes it doesn't. But let's take a look. I'm mirroring my geometry, right? Here's what it looks like on one side. And then when I mirror it, I get this. All right. Does that look right? No. No. Something went amok. What happened, do you think? It relates to something we learned last class. You guys remember we were running the cleanup tool? Some hairy stuff happened. What do you think happened? You can guess.
There's something wrong with the original model. Is there hidden bases where it's trying to go off of different bases?
That's an interesting thought because those kinds of things can lead to strange mirroring. Because if there's something wrong with the geometry, that will lead to strange calculation. In this instance, that's not the case. But could that be something? Heck yeah. There's a value. Anybody know what value we're talking about? Threshold. Absolutely, because when those two pieces merge together, it's merging the vertices, and we talked about the most important thing was threshold, right? So this happened because my threshold was not set to the correct amount for this particular mirror. Now, here's where that history thing comes in handy. If I select the object, I can see down here, polymirror. Whatever's on top is the thing you did most recently. So when I select that, it breaks down everything that took place in that polymirror. And if I go through this, you will see there's an element in there called merge threshold. So when I merge this thing, based on those settings, my merge threshold is 3.662. So every vertice, if you click on the polymirror in your history, and you have to have the channel box open. So make sure you select this icon up here on the far upper right. And then you may need to grab the tab here because you might have a couple of them on the side. Make sure you've got the one that says channel box. And if you look at your polymirror, you'll see the threshold is set for 3.662. That's kind of high, right? What happens if I put in a small number like 0.001 for that threshold, a nice small number, it fixes the mirror. Does that make sense? So here's an instance where I can go back in time, access the history of the object, and make an adjustment to it, and it's actually to my advantage. Does that make sense? This is an instance where history is your friend. Yes?
If you delete history after before you realize there's a problem,
Mm-hmm.
then you go back, can you still go to that channel box, or because you deleted history, you can't?
Well, when I hit undo, the history will come back on. Yeah, well, here's where you get into trouble. If I deleted history and then saved the file, it won't come back on. Once you save it, that's all she wrote. Does that make sense? Also, something to bear in mind with history is I can use this poly mirror and mirror one thing to the other, and then I can do a series of extrusions, and I can do some insert edge loops, and I can do some modeling and make this, Megazord mailbox out of this thing, right? And then I go, oh, wait, I had my merge threshold set for the wrong thing, and go back in history and change my merge threshold, and my geometry will just come apart. Does that make sense? Because I did too much after I did that. And by changing that, I'm messing with the math that creates this geometry. It's like literally like going back in time and, before the big gymnastics meet, breaking your own arm. That's going to change the future. Does that make sense? And in some instances, in a very bad way. So history in some ways is your buddy, some ways not. More often than not, it's not your friend. And that's why we delete it periodically and keep it nice and clean.
Can you crash Maya by doing that too?
Deleting the history? No.
By if you made like mega mailbox and then try to go.
I don't believe you would necessarily crash Maya. I don't think I've ever done that, but the geometry does completely come apart. So it just sort of explodes. But luckily I saved every 15 minutes, so I can just go back to my previous saves and it's all good. But yeah, geometry will completely freak out. Wait till you start painting weights. You get vertices that fly off into space. Go ahead.
If you mirror something but then continue to change the original, will it change the mirrors, or will it just...
It will not. What you're talking about there is we can do instances, and we can incorporate symmetry tools to do that kind of thing. Absolutely. But they're not attached using history as a means of making a modification to both. It's a very interesting question. But we're talking about different tools that we have at our disposal, but not in this instance. No pun intended. All right. So again, that mirrors it across there. And we're all excited because, we didn't have to build all of that stuff. So now let's come over here, and I'm going to hide my image planes over here. And I want you guys to tell me, what axis is my geometry in? X-axis, right? Because I see the red arrow. Again, don't get hung up on left and right. It's all relative. So I'm in the X-axis. Now, is it positive or negative? Oh, we're in positive X, and we want to send it to negative X. So let's run the tool. Again, you select the mailbox in object mode. We go to mesh. We go to mirror. We go to the options box, and we change it to X as our axis that we wish to mirror into, and then we choose the negative axis in terms of which way we want it to go. We hit mirror, and then boom. Now I've got this piece too. And the whole thing is working just fine. Yes?
So where it says cut geometry, is that a way for if you have like an object that's closed off, or if you like duplicate, you're not going to have faces on top of faces? Or?
Kind of, yeah. It's just a means of making it so that when you mirror things, it does just a better job of attaching them. It basically snips off parts that are overhanging, because if you mirror it without that, it might not necessarily do that. Because I have had instances where the mirror tool, let me see if I can get it to do it. No, it's chopping it off. But what it will do in some instances is it will look for the vertex that's the furthest to the side and mirror off of that. So then what you end up with is this huge gap between the parts. So that cutting will allow it to just kind of snip off any overhanging what have you, so that it just attaches more neatly. Good question though. Boop. So again, that saves us a tremendous amount of time because we can just mirror stuff around. So literally I built the whole mailbox. I only had to build a quarter of it and I got the rest of it. So good idea to try to, you know, when you're looking at an object before you even start building it, ooh, I could build that once and then sort of mirror it around or duplicate it around. And you will find that one of the keys to building a really interesting scene, because there's always a lot of stuff in any given scene, there's a lot of duplication. You know, how can I use what I've already got to speed this along? So it's quite handy in that regard. All right, so that's the mirror tool. Let's take a look at another fun little tool that can help us out tremendously. And this is the Duplicate with Transform tool. And this is a very interesting tool because it duplicates. You know, we get that. We just make another one of whatever it is we have. But the other thing that it does is it sort of starts recording how you move the object when you duplicate it. And it will literally incorporate that movement into the next duplicate. Now, to kind of give you an idea of what I'm talking about, how many of you guys have ever seen a bicycle wheel? All right. Yeah, don't be shy. I'm not tricking you. It's a bicycle wheel, right? Bicycle. You're like, wait a minute. Have I seen a bicycle wheel? You've seen bicycle wheels. A bicycle wheel, it is early. A bicycle wheel is composed of a whole bunch of metal spokes, right? Could you imagine trying to model the spoke of a bicycle wheel and then make a whole bunch of copies of it and turn each copy the right amount so that it looks right and everything is spaced evenly? Does that make sense? Do you know, you guys are looking at me like you don't know what I'm talking about. Steve's talking about weird stuff. Let me go to my buddy Google. Yeah, Google knows everything. All right. How would you like to have to model that and then get the spacing of all of those spokes correct, exactly in the right place? Because you know if one's out of place, you're going to see it, right? You can't hide that. So point being, I know, you're right, because this is a sort of a perfectionist and detail-oriented line of work. So you're going to be like, argh! But bottom line is that would be brutally difficult to do on your own. So how does this duplicate with transform tool work? I can literally build one spoke, duplicate it using that tool, move it into the position that the second one has to be in, and it will record all that information. And then when I make subsequent duplicates, it will make each one the exact same adjustment. So I only have to do it one time, and then it will populate the rest of them. Think about also like links on a tank tread. I can build one of those things because they interlock, right? I can build one and then move it into position and then make a series of duplicates. And I don't have to worry about making sure the spacing looks good. Does that make sense? So duplicate with transform, pretty cool tool. Let's take a look at how we can use that guy to our advantage. And we're going to use it to make this spiral staircase here, which is super fun. And this is what you're going to have to remember because we're going to literally input some values. So please write these down. For your translate X value, you're going to have 0.3. For your translate Y value, also 0.3. And for your rotate Y value, 7 degrees. 7 degrees. Now, the key here when you're using this tool is number one, you can't stop sort of in the middle of whatever you're doing and go click off in space and go call your friends and go move something else and then come back and expect Maya to remember all that stuff. Does that make sense? It's sort of a, you have to do it in sequence. If you click off into space, click on something else, Maya will sort of stop recording your movements. So you want to make sure you're kind of doing things in order in a sequence. The other thing that's very important is if you are plugging in values here in the channel box, which is what we're going to be doing, you have to be sure to hit enter after you put the value in there. Don't just click on a different field. Click on the field, enter the number, and then hit enter. Then go to another field. Does that make sense? Sort of a hard install of that number. So 0.3, 0.3, and 7 degrees. So let's open up that activity. And again, file open scene. We've already set our project, so we can just find that guy. And it's yeah, it's in the, no. Oh, there we go. Duplicate with transform. Sometimes I get a little wordy with my file names. All right, so here we go. Here's my first little step for my spiral stairs, and it's time to use my duplicate with transform. If you go to edit, you will see duplicate with transform. So again, if you recall from using anything that duplicates, when you make a duplicate, the duplicate is right on top of the original. So don't panic if you don't see anything. It's there. The key will be if you look up in your channel box, you will see the next number in sequence. Computers are great for numbering things, so you'll see it'll be step 2. So step 1, select the object in object mode. Got to be object mode, got to be selected. Edit, duplicate with transform. So you can see it says step 2 there, so I've got my step selected. So now Maya is recording if I make any movement of this object. So here's where I'm going to plug in my values. We said for translate X, we're going to put in 0.3, enter. That's going to move it back a tiny bit. Then we go to our translate Y, and we put in 0.3, enter. That's going to move it up a little bit. Then we go to our rotate Y value, and I type in 7 degrees, and that's going to sort of rotate it ever so slightly. 7 degrees of rotation. Now, without letting go, if you look at your keyboard right now and you see the G key, as in George, the G key in Maya is sort of a repeatable function key. And what you're saying when you use that key is, whatever you just did, Maya, do it again, because I like it. So if you did an extrusion and you hit G, it's going to do another extrusion. Does that make sense? Some tools are repeatable. Some are not, but many of them are. So think of that as like a fully automatic function. So while this thing is still selected, you notice I didn't let go of it. You can go click on anything else. While this is still selected, I press G on my keyboard. Boop, and it makes another step. G, G, G. And I can literally keep hitting the G key, and it's going to keep making these duplicates. Huh? Watson and Crick would be pleased. Look at that thing go. And I can make as many of those duplicates as I want. All right. Now, in terms of that file, because you might be thinking, okay, well, what if I don't know the value? What if, you know, I don't have 0.3, 0.3, and 7? Well, here's the thing. Again, select the object in object mode, edit, duplicate with transform, go to my move tool, move it up. I'm going to move it back. I'm going to put some rotation on it. I'll rotate it on another axis as well. And then I use my G key. Does that make sense? You don't have to know the specific values. You can just move it. And Maya will make that for you. Again, it's pretty cool when you're trying to build some kind of pattern with whatever it is you're making. So you only have to make part of something. Again, it saves you a tremendous amount of time to be able to do that. Yes? Right. Well, make sure, again, if you click off into space at any process in the middle, Maya stops recording and it doesn't remember anything you did. So make sure, open up the file again, brand new, select the step and only the step, and then make sure you're using duplicate with transform as your tool, and don't ever deselect the object. Through the process, straight from select, edit, duplicate with transform, all the movement, you never let go of the thing. Does that make sense? And then I guarantee you it will work. But it is one of those things where once you get the touch, it makes sense. Yeah?
What happens if you accidentally click on the
Well, here's the thing. That's a great question. Sometimes it will remember and sometimes not. So let's say, for example, I have this step selected and I go edit, duplicate with transform, and I move it over here. I move it up here. I click off into space. I select it again, move it, put some rotation on it. All right. And then I go G. Yeah. Doesn't know what I did. It made my new duplicate on top of my old one. Does that make sense? So again, there's limitations to everything. And in terms of when Maya records and remembers all this stuff, as long as you keep it selected, you're going to be okay. And again, you notice I'm not letting go of it. I still have it. And then I start using my G. Does that make sense? So again, just don't let go. Hold on loosely, but don't let go. All right. I don't expect them to get that one. All right. A, it wasn't that funny, and B, you had to be there. Yeah, that's a good tune, though, I think. All right, let's get back. All right, very cool. Okay, let's talk a little bit about poly count. Poly count, you'll hear this term come up quite a bit. In fact, some of you have even brought it up in class already. Poly count is the idea that we can actually measure the complexity of a polygon object using the term poly count. We love to measure things, gallons, miles an hour, gigawatts. We just love to measure stuff. So how do we measure polygons? Because they don't really exist. They're just points in space inside of a computer. So how the heck do we measure them? Well, we measure them by counting up how many faces it requires to build the thing we're talking about. And that's its poly count. Now, in most instances, it's not a big deal. It doesn't make any difference what your poly count is. Optimus Prime in the Transformers movies was about a cool 2 million polygons. So, actually Optimus Prime, but similar ideology behind their capacity. But the idea here is, to be honest with you, when you look at those models, I would have thought more than 2 million. Because that thing's impressive, but that's ILM. Some of the best modelers that ever lived built those guys. So, but anyway, point being, a lot of polygons on the screen. That's okay. However, that gets very different when you're talking about video games. Now, for those of you who saw Transformers and Optimus Prime in the movie, right? He was pretty awesome. And in terms of the detail and the complexity of what was going on there. How many of you played Transformers the video game, though? Did you guys see that? A couple of you did, right? Did Optimus Prime look the same in the game as he did in the movie? No, not even close, right? Because here's the thing. Yes, you're like, seriously? This is Prime? Forget it. Anyway, point being, not to knock on the game at all, but the point being, video games have what they call polygon limits or poly limits. And what that means is when you're playing a game, depending on the platform you're playing the game on, bigger consoles, bigger games, they can do math faster. They can think more quickly. They can process information. And what's happening is your computer or your video game is literally drawing for you what you can see. And we're going to talk more about the rendering process a little bit later in the class. But point being, no pun intended, when it comes to drawing stuff on the screen for you, smaller handheld units cannot process or draw as quickly as a larger one. So as a result, the graphics on a smaller unit are not going to be as impressive as a larger unit. And neither of those are as good as going to a movie at this point in time. There will come a time when that changes. But when you're watching a video game, or you're watching a movie, Optimus Prime can be 2 million polygons in complexity because the computer is going to draw that picture for you, and however long it takes it to draw the picture is fine because movies open in a year, sometimes 2. So we have a lot of time to make that picture. When you're playing a video game, your computer is drawing pictures for you about 60 frames a second. So it's got to draw super fast. So just like you, if it's a more complex drawing, it takes longer to draw. Simple drawing, you can draw quickly. Does that make sense? So when you're building assets for a video game, you might be told, I need you to build Ahsoka's lightsaber and it can't go over 500 polygons. So how do you measure the complexity? Using your poly count, which will tell you how many polygons are in the object that you're building.
Does there come a limitation for the number of polygons in a film and animated series?
No, because however long it takes is however long it takes. Films, we'll say film runs at 24 frames a second, right? 24 images run together in rapid succession creates the phenomenon called persistence of vision, which we perceive as motion. It's not really moving, but we think it is. Now, in terms of that movie, 1 frame of Transformers took 40 hours to render. So if it takes 40 hours to draw 1 picture, which is a 24th of a second, you can see it's going to take a real long time to make a whole movie. But it doesn't matter because the movie doesn't open for a year. So no big deal. If you were playing a video game and you press a button or you turn a corner and you had to wait 40 hours for your game to draw what you see, you probably wouldn't play that game, right? That'd be like the worst lag in history. So the point being, based on processor speed, we have limits of what can be on the screen. Does that make sense? It's all math.
So depending on where it is exactly in the game or movie taking place, depending on how powerful the machine is, it'll take a certain amount of time or do a certain amount of polygons for you too.
Absolutely, because you've probably installed a game on your computer and it wasn't running right, it was lagging, and you had to like turn off some of the cool stuff that are part of the game in order to get it to run at the right speed. Because it can't handle it, it can't do the math quickly enough. That's why they have put in information of your machine must be able to do this, 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 this in order to handle all of these cool capacities that are built into this game. Because otherwise you have what we call lag, which is just as awful as it sounds. Things move slowly. Nobody likes lag. Poor lag. But anyway, how do we get, if there's such thing as poly limits, how do I figure out what my poly limits are? If you go to your Maya interface, your main menu item, look for display. In the drop down, you'll see heads up display. And under that, you'll see poly count. If you navigate that, that will actually turn on some numbers for you, which will actually write out for you exactly how many polygons. And what you're looking at is faces. So this object has 489 faces. I am under my 500 poly limit. So this is good to go. This will function within the game engine that it was designed for. Display, heads up display, poly count. Well, it'll activate it either way. That's a good question. There's a series of rows of numbers, and those numbers tell you how many objects in the scene in total, how many objects selected, how much within my view right now. So this just, they break it down like so you can determine. Yep, because that is important. You need to know. All right, so that's super handy, again, for getting your pivot point, or pivot point, I'm already jumping, getting your poly counts to be within whatever limits you've been given. So for example, someone will tell you, hey, you need to build this mailbox and it needs to be under 100 polygons. All right, here's another vocabulary. Oh, go ahead.
Is there
No.
like a way to set it to, like set Maya saying, hey, I can't go over this number?
Not to my knowledge, in terms of out-of-the-box Maya. But as we talked about last class, Maya is basically computer language, a series of instructions, scripting. So could you make a script or a set of program-like instructions and tell Maya to create sort of a warning that goes on if you're going too high. Well, you can't tell it don't do it, but you could say, could you put on a warning flash or something, or could you make my geometry turn purple if I go over this amount or whatever. Yeah, that's just written instructions, right? Maya could execute. You just have to know the language that Maya speaks. Does that make sense? But yeah, definitely. And to be honest with you, as a rule, I don't like giving the machine the power to stop me from doing things. You know, let me know about stuff, warn me about things, but don't lock me out. Don't make it so I can't do something. Does that make sense?
Yeah, be in control of
Yes. I'm in charge, not Maya. I'm sorry. Yeah, I did. I said that kind of loud. I hope Maya didn't hear me. Hopefully it was busy plotting the overthrow of the humanity.
It's just gonna crash.
Yeah, probably. But the point is, I'm supposed to lead. It's exactly how we get Skynet. But I'm supposed to be the lead on the dancing, if that makes any sense. So we work together, but I'm supposed to be leading. You can lead next time. All right, let's talk about, before I infuriate Maya any further, let's talk about pivot points. Pivot points are critically important to the functionality of objects. And we talked about this last class where we were talking about how things move. And what we need to talk about is the fact that a pivot point actually determines the way things move or how they move. And that's why it's very important that we know where the pivot point is. And luckily, we have the ability to move the pivot point. Now, if you guys look at that door that we came into here in the classroom this morning, does it open in or out? The door does open out. Now, either A, you remembered that when you came in this morning, or B, you are familiar with OSHA standards with regard to doors in a public place. Doors have to open outward. In case there's an emergency, we can all get out. If doors open inward, we pile up against it and nobody gets out. Then we have the Owl Creek Cafe incident. But the idea here is we want to make sure we can get out. However, something to be aware of, in terms of that door, I can look at that door even if I've never gone in or out of it and I know it opens outward because I don't see the hinges. Hinges determine which way a door swings, which side of the door the hinges are on. Well, hinges are pivot points. They affect the functionality of the door. So what we can do is we can make sure to put the pivot points in the correct place to affect the functionality of the stuff we're building. So for example, if we're making scissors, where's the pivot point for scissors? Right here, right where that bolt goes right through there, that brad that holds these two pieces together. So it's very important, one would say pivotal, that the pivot point is in the right location in order to affect the functionality of the, I'm sorry, that was an easy one and a very bad one. And I don't usually do that. I must be really tired. I'm gonna go with that. I'm gonna go with that. We'll just sweep that one under the rug. But anyway, point being, I gotta have that pivot point in the right place or the scissors aren't gonna work right. So what we're gonna do is talk about how we can move those pivot points to affect the functionality of an object. So of course we have another fun little activity. The activity file folder we are still set for, so let's get back over there because that's a good time. How could I resist? All right, file, open scene, and we want our, yeah, edit pivot point, that's the one, you're right. This one's super fun. Edit pivot point. Oh, whoops, I grabbed the wrong one. No, I chose edge flow, I missed it. Missed it by one. All right, so here's what we got to work with. We've got two doors. One is very, very simple, and one is a little bit more fancy. But let's talk about pivot points. When it comes to the pivot point of an object, typically Maya puts the pivot point in the middle, wherever the heck that happens to be. And just, okay, that's the pivot point for that thing. But that does affect the way it moves. So for example, if I decide to rotate this door, I go to my rotate key, and you'll see, oh, wait, yeah, look, it rotates from the middle. Okay, because that's where the pivot point is. Now it's true, some doors rotate from the middle like that. And I'm sure you've been caught in one of those where somebody's not pushing or they stop and you get stuck in there. You know, some kid on the other side, you know, laughing because you can't get out. I'm not projecting there. Yes. Welcome to my world. Weird stuff happens. All right, so door pivots, right, based on that center. But what if I want this door to operate more like the door we came into this morning? What if I want it to pivot from the edge and specifically open out or open in? Well, here's where I can edit the pivot point and change the way it moves. Now, what we're going to do in order to do this is first we have to enter edit pivot point mode, because the problem is if I have my pivot point and I try to move it, the whole object moves. So what I need to do is move the pivot point but not the object. So in order to enter edit pivot point mode, all you have to do is, if you look at your keyboard, hit D as in David on your keyboard and you go into edit pivot point mode. Now be aware you don't want to accidentally touch the rotations because you can set those incorrectly as well. So make sure we're just working with the arrows. And what I'm going to do is with my left mouse button, I'm going to move those pivot points, and I'm going to use my orthographic views because they're really good at lining stuff up. That's why we love the orthographic views. So I'm going to use that, and then I'm going to use my top view and move it to the corner there so that in theory this door should open relative to my position outward. So once I get that pivot where I want it to be, I hit D as in David again, and then now my pivot point permanently lives in this new location, which if I switch to my rotate tool, now my door opens outward. Hooray, and there was much rejoicing, right? So in terms of this door, I've got another door, but it's got problems. Now, in terms of this door, it rotates from the middle, which any good bank vault will not. So this is a problem. Also, I've got this locking mechanism here, which is clearly not pivoting from the right location. That thing should spin in place. And I've got this locking handle on here with a similar issue. So what I would like for you guys to do is edit the position of the pivot point of the door, the locking mechanism, and the handle so that they all function properly. Now, know in advance that when you open and close the door, the handle and the locking mechanisms are not going to move with it yet. That's what we're going to talk about next. But for now, let's get all that stuff pivoting correctly, because we work the pivots first and then we get stuff to move together. And that'll be the other half of what we talk about today. All right, so Brian and I will walk around to see how you guys are doing. I want to see you modify the pivot point of the door and make it work. Make those parts work properly. All right, do you have the file for the edit pivot point? Let's set your project first, okay? Close that. Go to File, Set Project. Okay, and choose your activity file folder. Good, set. Now go to File, Open Scene.
We didn't choose that.
File, Open Scene. And then you want your edit pivot point. There you go. Okay. Now, hit OK. If you select this and you rotate it, there you go. Rotate it on the green axis. See how it spins from the middle? Because that's where the pivot point is. Now hit Z. All right, so now we go back to where we started. Now I want to move that to over here. So what you'll do is press D on your keyboard, move it with the arrows to the edge, and then press D again. Press D one more time. There you go. Now, oh, one more time with the D. There you go. Now, if you try to rotate it, does it rotate from the middle?
It rotates from the side.
It rotates from the side. Okay, so what I want you to do is that same thing, fix this door so that this spins in place. this spins in place and this opens like that door does. Because you can see the pivot points are wrong. Do you remember the key you need? D. D as in David. All right, how you guys doing with this pivot? Press W for your move tool so you know where it is. You press D on your keyboard and that will let you move it. Grab the arrows. And then hit D again when you're done. Yeah.
Where can I see the 3D FTTT file? The lecture. 3D FTTT.
Oh, all the lectures are recorded and they're posted on FSL. So if you go to FSL and you go to there,
Here and
yeah, yep, yep, you're welcome. How's everybody doing? Okay? Good, good? Awesome. Very good. Yeah.
Actually, I don't know how I did it, but my tools on the top where it shows my polygons and everything just got deleted. I don't know.
Oh, well, it didn't get deleted, but you closed it somehow. Go to your Maya preferences and go to restore to default and see if that brings everything back. You have to go to the word Maya in the upper left-hand corner, like up in that white area, and then go to preferences. Try it not in maximized view. Hit escape so that Maya becomes smaller. Or, there you go. Now move that. And you want to click on the word Maya. When you click on Maya, here, take a look. Look on my screen up there. Do you see where you see the black apple in the upper left-hand corner? And then you see the word Maya next to it? So it's not on the Maya interface. No. No, it's telling you what application you're in. Does that make sense? Yeah, you should be able to get to your Maya preferences. Yeah, try go under Window and Settings and Preferences. And see Preferences. There you go. Upper left-hand corner of that window. Restore default. How's it going? Good? Mm-hmm.
But then,
Although I would probably put that pivot right over the hinges so that it's directly on top of those.
and then it's like later on, like, do we learn how like you would have that move?
Oh yeah, that's what we're doing next. But we do pivots first because that's the order that you have to do them in. But yep, we're doing that next. How's everybody doing? We got it? Awesome. Good, good. Mm-hmm. Yep. That is correct. You are good. You good, you're good. All right. How'd you guys all do? Good? Good? Everybody got it with the door? Awesome. All right. Now, don't close this file because now we're going to talk about how do I make stuff move together. So don't close it yet. Yes, they are not moving together, not yet. But we're going to make them move using an idea called hierarchy. Yeah, hierarchy. Hierarchy is the idea that we need to create a chain of command in order to get things to move together. We have to set up a series of controls, I guess, in terms of the behavior, what governs how things move in Maya. Because geometry, you know, again, it's not real, it's just sort of points in space that we create, and we create these individual pieces. Well, how do we get them to move together? Well, we're going to use this idea called hierarchy. And hierarchy works as hierarchy by definition is. It's almost like a family tree. You've got people on the top that tell the people below them what to do. And then there's people in that row that can tell the people below them. So, you know, grandparents tell their kids what to do, and those kids where your parents tell the kids what to do, and the oldest kids tell the younger kids what to do. There's a hierarchy. There's sort of a chain of command that exists there so that you know whose instructions you have to follow and whose you don't. So the keys are, when you're trying to make something move, is you have to have a obvious or clear hierarchy or chain of command in place, and you have to be receiving one instruction from one direction, and you can do it. So for example, if your mom tells you to mow the lawn and your dad tells you to wash the car, you can't do that. That's two different instructions from people who are above you. So in terms of that hierarchy, one clear set of instructions from a hierarchy that makes sense in terms of the order, and you can execute. Does that make sense? And this is what governs movement. So let's take a look at how that works. And incidentally, in terms of hierarchy, just so that you get the idea, this window here, the hypergraph hierarchy, which we're going to jump into shortly, actually visually demonstrates for you the hierarchy of a given scene. Now, what you're looking at here is an image that depicts the nodes in Maya. And Maya is a node-based application. You'll hear me talking about that periodically because some applications are set up differently than others. For example, Photoshop is a layer-based application. And basically the way it works is you have a series of layers, and each layer is like a piece of paper. And what you're doing is you're looking down on your desk with all of these layers or these pieces of paper on top of each other. And what you can see ultimately is a linear collection of what all those pieces of paper do. Some of them affect each other, some don't, some you can see through, some you can't. And that ultimately composites together to be a single image that you're looking down on. Does that make sense? That is a linear application. That is a layer-based application. Maya is a node-based application. And what that means is you can stick things anywhere you want to and go any direction. It's not linear at all. It's more like Legos or Tinker Toys, an erector set. You know, you have a few key pieces that you can stick together any way you want and go in any direction with it. It's a concept of 3D in and of itself, node-based versus layers. Does that make sense a little bit? Okay, so what you're looking at here is these are nodes, and basically each node, you know, whatever you name it, that's what's on there. And these little pictures tell you what those nodes are. This means geometry. So there's a piece of geometry called upper jaw, and that's what that node is. And then you can see the hierarchy of how these things work together. All right, so let's talk a little bit about hierarchy and making things move, and then we will go back to our door file. All right. I'm going to make a couple of objects here, and we are going to play an observation game. I like games. All right, here we go. If I want to make objects move together, based on what we know how to do already, I can select one object, hold shift and select the other object, and they will move together. So if I grab them and I try to move them, they move together, all right? But they don't do that automatically. Now, in terms of rotation though, they behave a little bit differently. If I rotate two selected objects, you'll notice that they do rotate in sync. However, they seem to have their own point that they pivot around. There is a sense of individuality there. Does that make sense? So they all pivot in their own little space, but they are moving at the same time. Now, they aren't really in a hierarchy at this point. I've just got two things selected. So things to be aware of when you've got more than one thing selected. Number one, you'll notice that one object is white and one object is green. They're different colors. And the way Maya works is, if you have multiple objects in a scene, as you select them, whatever you select last will be green and everything else will be white. That gives you your order of selection, which actually affects other things that we do in Maya, but not really anything at this point. But some are white and some are green. Another thing to notice is when you select an object in Maya, its name appears in the channel box, right? Sphere 1. If I select more than one object, I get one of the objects and ... This is an indication that more than one thing is selected. Make sense? Okay. Now, in terms of the hypergraph hierarchy, this is that window that shows us the nodes that represent everything in any given scene. If you go to Window, General Editors, Hypergraph Hierarchy, you can open up the hypergraph hierarchy window. And what you will see is that the hypergraph hierarchy window is a orthographic window. So it's just like your front view or your side view in terms of its navigation. You can't tumble, but you can track or dolly and zoom in and out. And you'll see, oh, there's the node for the sphere and there's the node for the cube. And I can either select the sphere in Maya space, and you'll see it lights up in the hypergraph hierarchy, or I can select the node in the hypergraph hierarchy, and it also selects out in the interface out here. Just like all windows in Maya, they work together. They're just showing us different things. All right? Now, in terms of their behavior, again, when I select the two objects, one's one color, one's another, I get ... in the channel box. All right. And then they pivot in their own space. Now, we did learn a process called grouping, right, to get us to move stuff together. I'm not really sure what the heck we did, but I know if I group things, somehow they move together. Well, what happens is when you group, you're creating a special relationship based on a hierarchy between objects. Now, in terms of what does this relationship mean, how does it work? Let's say I take these two objects, right? I've got tape and I've got whatever this is. I'm almost afraid. No, there's nothing in there, thank goodness. And it doesn't even have like a belt clip. This is an utterly useless thing. But anyway, let's say, you know what I mean? Like, look, I got a container to put stuff in, but it's a weird shape. It doesn't have anything to put on my belt. And, you know, why not just put it right in your pocket? Unless it's alive. I don't know what this is for. Anyway, point being, in terms of these two objects, I want them to move together. So what I'll do is I will group them. And the way I'd like you to think of grouping is imagine that you are creating an invisible box. You can't see it, but it has physicality. So I take these two objects and I decide to group them. Edit, group. Now they're in this invisible box. So in terms of them being in the box, they can move around in the box all they want. But as soon as I pick up the box, they have to go wherever the box goes because they're in it. They can move within the box if they need to, but they are in that box, and wherever I take the box, they have no choice but to go. Does that make sense? Okay. So if I want to group these two objects, again, I just select them, and then I go to Edit, and I choose Group. All right? Now, what's different? Use your keen powers of observation. They're both green. I heard that. So that's different. And in the channel box, it says Group 1. Totally different. Also, where's the pivot point? It's at the origin, right? So a lot of things have just changed. Let's take a look at how this affects behavior. Number one, they do both move together, but watch what happens when I rotate them. They're both rotating around that pivot point. Does that make sense? There's no sense of self there. Utter control is what I see there. Does that make sense? All right, let's take a look at what the hypergraph hierarchy has to show us. Oh yeah, look at that. Cube 1 and sphere 1 are now in the hierarchy of Group 1. Does that make sense? And incidentally, in terms of creating things, you always want to try to name stuff. So you could call it shape group. Just click in that field up at the top and you can name things. That's going to become a thing. All right. So now the way this works is just actually the way it works in the hypergraph hierarchy. I can move this and they both move. If I move this, they both move. Same sort of physiology in terms of its behavior. Now it's true I can move the cube on its own. I can move the sphere on its own. If I come over here, I can move the sphere on its own. I can move the cube on its own. But once I select the group, everybody moves together. Everybody moves together. And it doesn't matter if the node is physically above the thing that's in charge of it, right? Just because you're in a tree doesn't mean your parents can't tell you what to do anymore, right? So point being, you got to be able to move. Yeah?
It doesn't affect if you put one on top of the group and then just leave one at the bottom.
No. It's absolutely the way they're connected to each other. Now, in terms of the behavior here, I can create groups, I can get rid of groups, I can take things out of groups if I want to. If I hold down the middle mouse button over a node, I get the green plus of power. And I can drag off into space and let go, and that severs the connection. The sphere is no longer in the group of shape group. Just like, again, if I grab the group, the cube will move, but the sphere does not because it's outside of it. It's outside of it. Does that make sense? I can add it back in if I want to. If I hold down the middle mouse button, again, I get the green plus of power, and I can drag it to the node that I want it to be in charge and let go, and that'll reconnect it. And then they're back together. One big happy 3D family, right? Now, in terms of the behavior, I can select objects in the group and delete them. That's not a problem. But if I select something that is in charge and I delete it, everything that it's in charge of goes as well. That's how under control those things are. Yes?
So if you had that hierarchy,
Mm-hmm.
and you added another object, does it just show up in the hierarchy?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I can make another object. There it is. And if I want to, I can add it to the hierarchy. All right? And that governs the movement. This is called grouping. That's one way to make things move together. All right? Now, there are other ways to make things move. There's a process called parenting. Parenting also makes things move together. It creates a hierarchy. However, parenting is a different idea. It's a direct correlation. You're not in a group. There's a parent and there's a child. And the way it's supposed to work, the parent tells the child what to do and the child does it. Again, theory. So in terms of, let's create one of those. I make a sphere. I make a cube. And let's say I want there to be a parent-child relationship between these two objects. So first I have to determine who's the parent and who's the child. I want the sphere to be the parent and I want the cube to be the child. So to set this relationship up, we always select the child first when creating a parent-child relationship. We have to establish who the child is. And in your scene, you could have 50 objects, and if you select all of them, 49 of them will be child of the 50th. You can have many children, but you've only got one parent. Does that make sense? Okay. So I want the cube to do what the sphere says, so I select the cube first, and I shift select the sphere. Then I go to Edit, and I choose Parent. Now, the cube can still move on its own if it wants to. But once you select the sphere, what do you see? They look like they're both selected, right? They're both green. What does it say in the channel box? Just sphere. Does it say ... Does that guy get any credit? None. Sphere. That's it. Okay, let's look at the hypergraph hierarchy. Sphere. Okay, here's the interesting thing. The cube looks selected, right? Is it? It's not. If it was selected, they would both be yellow. But the truth of the matter is, it's not. Now, the reason that's taking place is because when you set up a relationship or a hierarchy between objects, if you select any object, if there's anything in its hierarchy, it will also light up to let you know, hey, I'm part of this other thing's hierarchy. Does that make sense? So the cube does not light up, but it looks like it's lit. All right, and again, just like grouping, if you delete the parent, they both go. However, it is possible to just get rid of the child. In some states, apparently. Go ahead. Edit parent. Yep, edit parent. Yeah, sorry, my examples get weirder and weirder the less sleep I get, so I apologize. All right, so let's see how this stuff moves, okay? Again, if I select the sphere, the cube still has its sense of self, you know, buy me a transformer, I want ice cream. But when the parent says, we are leaving, they both have to go. So the child is pretty much utterly under the control of the parent. Again, in theory. Does that make sense? Yeah, no, it's how you could set up a solar system. Yes.
So basically, that what you use parenting largely for is making automatically whatever the parent is the pivot point.
Ooh, yes. Based on the pivot point of the parent. All right, now we got a bunch of really good ideas about making stuff move going in our heads right now, right? So use some of those ideas and make your door work. Because you've got your pivot points in the right place, so now you just got to figure out who's in charge and make those things move together. So Brian and I will walk around, demonstrate for us your understanding of hierarchy by making your door function. The door should open and all the parts should move with it.
So we can do either or, they both give out the same result?
They do both give out the same end result, but sometimes one is better than the other in terms of preference. What do I need it to do? Always that question. Does that make sense? So you have to ask yourself, which one's going to give me what I want the most easily? Window, general editors, hypergraph hierarchy. And I think it's also under just window.
No, it used to be. It's not. They didn't ask me that.
Bastards. Bastards.
I know. It's
Yeah.
very convenient there.
Well, you know, it's job security. If you keep changing things
That's right.
at Autodesk, you know, somebody's got to get that job. All right, so we'll walk around. We'll see how you guys are doing. Let's get those doors working. Get them functional. Yes. Yeah. It is one of the reasons, because if it does move, it's going to have its own pivot point and its own ability to move. So it almost, that's why we do that, build it like it's built. Does that make sense? The whole ideology behind build the object the way the real one is built so that it will function properly. Because that affects not only the way it's constructed, the way it looks, but its functionality. Because not only do we model the objects, but we're going to build them so that they work. Make sense? Because now they can be animated. Yep. Is it Control B? Yeah, do this. Go to Maya and reset your preferences overall. Upper left-hand corner, restore to default, and then hit save. And see if it, yes. Awesome.
If I want this guy, I want to put his pivot point back here. But
That's correct.
Is there a shortcut to make it to the origin of the object?
Yes, there is, but you don't want to be in edit pivot point mode when you do it. It's sort of counterintuitive. But if you go to modify, you can choose center pivot. but it's going to center it.
Oh, right here.
Yep. And that's going to move it to the middle, but that's also middle front to back as well as up to down. So you may want to actually move that pivot point to where the locking mechanism goes right up against the door. Does that make sense? In some instances where that pivot point is, as long as it's in the middle, you're good. But in some instances you want it like on that back edge. So center pivot will bring it to the middle of whatever's selected, but you might still need to move it. Does that make sense? Because if this was like the door pivoting part, if you can use modify center pivot, that'll put it in the middle, but that's not going to put it on the lead or trailing edge to make sure the door opens in the correct direction. Does that make sense? Yeah, that one is fine. Yeah. In this instance, it works out fine. Yeah. No, there is a thing for that. You're welcome. How are we doing? Everybody okay with the door? Good job. How's it going? Good? Good, good, good. Excellent. Like to see that note taking. That's awesome. How are we doing? Okay. What's the part that you're having trouble with? Uh-huh. Okay. Now, in terms of grouping, did you create a group already? Or not? Okay. Well, first you have to move the pivot points of your door. Is that where your door should pivot from, right there in the middle, or should it be the edge? Right. So how do we move a pivot point? Select it. D. That's correct. Now use your x-axis, use that red arrow and move it over to the edge of your door. Yep. Makes sense? Now hit D. Now you're back into regular mode. All right? Now, if you check your locking mechanism, that thing that spins around, yep. All right. Is the pivot point for that in the right place? No. How do we move the pivot point to the right place? Yeah. D on your keyboard. Remember, it's the same thing. Now this time use the green and the red arrows to put it into position. All right, and then you hit D again. Now that moves from there. Does that make sense? Now, if you want those pieces to move together, we talked about two different ways we can do it. Grouping and parenting. Which one do you want to do? Okay. In a parent-child relationship, which one do you select first? That's right. So that's the child. So which one do you want to move and which one do you want to be in charge? The door is what, the parent or the child? Well, the door, actually in this instance, since we want the door to lead, because when the door opens, you want the locking mechanism to move with it, right? So that would make the door the parent and the locking mechanism the child. So in a parent-child relationship, you select the child first. Which one's that? The locking mechanism. Good. And then you shift select the parent, the door. And then you go to edit, parent. Now, when you select the door, now rotate it. You see? They move together. But you can still select the locking mechanism and spin it around. Yes?
I'm trying to make the door turn, but the selection should centering only the bottom part.
Okay, well hang on 1 second. I'm almost done here and then I'll come over there. Make sense? That piece still spins because it's its own thing. See? You grab the blue axis and rotate it. So that still spins, but it moves when the door is open. So what I want you to do now is fix that handle, because that handle, the pivot point's in the wrong place and it's not moving with the door right now. So you have to redo what I just showed you how to do, but do that with the handle now. All right, so you need to move your pivot point, right? How do we get into edit pivot point mode?
Like,
do you remember? What key do I press?
D.
That's correct. So now use the red arrow and move it to the edge. There you go. Now press D again, and that'll lock it there. Okay, so now your door pivots from there. Move the pivot, and you'll see. See? Good? All right, now hit Z for undo so it goes back to where it was. Now, the next thing, this piece. All right, rotate it because it should spin around, right? So use your rotate tool. Is that moving right? No, it should be spinning, right? So what do you need to do? D, that's correct. And then move the pivot point to where it should be. All right. And then you got to move it over also. So hit D, almost. There you go. Move it to the left so it's in the middle. Keep going to the left. Yeah, over here. Whoop. There, right there. Now hit D to lock it. Got it? All right. Let go. There you go. Now rotate it. Now it's moving better. Does that make sense? Now, if I want that to move with the door, I want to make the door the parent, and that's the child, because I want the door to open and that to follow it. So that's the parent. So in a parent-child relationship, we select the child first, and then we shift select the parent, hold shift, and select the door. Oops, just select this. Just select that piece right here. You don't have to drag, just click it one time. Click off into space. Click it, just click right on it. Now hold shift and click on the door, just one click. There, now go to edit parent. It's up over here. Edit parent. Go down. Keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. It's towards the bottom, almost there. There you go. Parent. Now, if you grab the door, do you see how now they both light up? So when you open the door, they move together now. See?
Wow.
All right. So now you got to do that with this piece right here. Same thing. Move the pivot point and then put it into that hierarchy. Oh, okay. We're working on the edit pivot point activity. Yep. All right. Looks like you guys have got it. Good job. How's it going?
Still check for this lesson or lecture.
Yes.
I think I'm done, but I don't know if I am.
Well, if you select the bus, let me see. All right. Now select this mechanism over here and make the saw blades go up and down.
Okay.
How do you do that? I mean, using these control arms over here. Yeah, those things raise and lower it. So you got to set that thing up so it's doing the work of raising and lowering. All right. All right, looks like you guys are doing pretty well with this. That's great. Pivot points and hierarchy are very tricky, but it seems like you guys are doing okay. All right, so let's take a look at all right, so let's make things move together. That's what we just did with the doors. No. You guys are good. So what we're going to do is we're going to move on to and talk about our skill check for today's lecture. And I knew you'd be excited. What we're going to do is we're going to bring all these ideas together, kind of like what we did with the door, but with something a little bit more complex. The infamous zombie kill bus. The zombie kill bus. And incidentally, not a name I came up with. I'm sure you thought that was all me, but the students actually named this thing. But this is a skill check, so we want to make sure we set our project to our skill check file folder. So file, set project, and we choose the skill check files, set. And what we're going to do is open up our hierarchy project. All right, now, what we have is a very cute little bus. And the wheels on the bus go round and round all over town, but they do not follow the bus, because where the bus goes, yeah, this is a problem, right? So what we want to do is set up a relationship between the bus and the wheels. And again, what do I need it to do is what decides how we do it. And what I would like to be able to do is I want to be able to select the bus and then move that around, and the wheels go with it everywhere it goes, but the wheels still have the ability to rotate. So if I want to, I can make the wheels child of the bus. It's one way of doing it. Again, in a parent-child relationship, we always select the child first, shift select the parent, edit parent. All right, so now when I select the bus, the wheel goes with it, but the wheel still has the ability to rotate. Now I got a couple more wheels on there, and again, the good news is I can select several objects, and you'll notice I'm selecting the wheels first, and then the very last thing I select is the bus, and then I hit parent, and now the wheels on the bus go round and round, round and round, and all over town. All right, so this is all functioning well, but we're not done yet. If you look over here on this, oh, there's more. Don't act now. Free of charge. If you go to this layer here and you click the visibility, dun, dun, dun. Yes, this is our zombie kill bus. And it includes such optional accessories as armor plating, right? And this keeps the zombies from smashing through the glass and eating the driver and or passengers. We've got these nice spikes on the wheels here in case they seem to be ambling alongside. Yeah, it is. And the coolest accessory on the zombie kill bus, we have these saw blades, and they're mounted on these swing arms. And the idea of the swing arm is it allows you to raise and lower the zombie kill blades so that you can kill the tall and the short zombies. So what we have to do is set up a hierarchy so that we can bring all these cool accessories with us. So you can use parenting, you can use grouping, there's not a right or wrong answer. But what you do have to do is figure out what the hierarchy needs to be in order to make this bus functional in the very foreseeable future. So you have to set up a hierarchy. However, we also have to adjust pivot points of things. Because, for example, if you take a look, this swing arm is supposed to raise and lower those blades, right? Where it's pivoting right now, not going to work. Okay, so what you're going to need to do is edit the pivot points of all the parts that are going to need to move. Edit those first. Then go back and set up a hierarchy to make it functional. Because ultimately what I want to be able to do is grab the bus here, and then all the parts move with it, and then everything pivots as it should. And these control arms here literally raise and lower this shaft with the blades on it so that we can actually very efficiently thin out the zombie masses. So this hierarchy, I think what's nice about hierarchy and setup or rigging, which is a whole job in and of itself, there are people who do that, and it's actually a pretty cool job. What I really like about it is a little bit less artistically driven than some of the other disciplines, and it's very problem solving. So like if you like to fix things, you like to take stuff apart, figure out what makes a machine go and see if you can fix it again if there's something wrong with it. You know, when something's not working, your first thought is, where's my screwdriver? Oh, you might be a rigger or a setup artist, because that's what it is. And what's nice about rigging or setup is the fact that if it works, you did it right. So you just have to test it. You know, it's not arbitrary. The goal is to make everything move as you'd like it to. And of course, you always want to make it as easy to use and make sense in terms of your choices on how to set it up. But it's really fun stuff. And again, you can set up the machine that makes the geometry work. Now, the way we're gonna apply it to what we're working on is we are gonna edit the pivot points of various objects. again, like the scissors, so that the blades pivot in the correct location so they could be animated. And then we're going to set up a hierarchy that will control the functionality of the scissors. So for example, when I'm using scissors, I use the handles to control the blades. So you can start to see the hierarchy develop as a result of that. Now, and again, that's going to be incorporated with the turn-in. So when you look and you see, pivot point placement and functionality of the object as one of the things in the self-check, that's what we're talking about, hierarchy and pivots. So you got to make sure to incorporate that stuff into what you're doing. Now, in terms of where you can go with it, which is super fun, let's go to documents. Let's go to my stuff. How about this? All right, so here is a rig for a character, and basically what you're looking at is a hierarchy or chain of command that governs the way this thing moves. And what it allows you to do is, again, create controls that allow the characters to do things like jump up and down. And you can create controls for arms and hands so that they can move. And you can build really cool functions into the way things move and behave. And really neat parent-child orientation things.
No, that's not creepy at all.
a little bit, but you can't be weak of heart and work in this line of work. But at any rate, these are all controls, and just to give you an idea, I'll open the hypergraph hierarchy, and you can see those are the nodes for the cameras, but here are the nodes for this rig. But anyway, this is like a medium complexity rig. But you can see that the whole thing is made of little tiny components, right, that go together to make sort of the skeleton of it. And they're all connected to each other using like parent-child. It's all hierarchy because your whole body moves on a hierarchy. That's the way we function as well. So you just have to set it up, hence the name setup artist, and make the skeleton that makes stuff go. So again, these little baby steps we take in here lead to much more complex things later on if that's something you're interested in doing. And some people love this setup and rigging because again, it's very practical compared to some of the other disciplines which lean a little bit more artistic. Not that you can't have art to do this. I mean, it's really important you understand anatomy and physiology of a human being, or you can't make a rig for a human being and have it function properly. So, you know, that stuff still comes into play, but it's not quite as strong a component as some of the other disciplines. So some people gravitate towards this kind of thing as a job. Does that make sense? Okay. I did. Yeah, I modeled the character in Maya, rigged it in Maya. What's that? Oh yeah, oh yeah. And I have a little animation of it as well. I'm still working on it. I'm nowhere near done. I wish I had the kind of time it takes to finish this stuff. I just, if I could make time, I would. But let me see. Here's a rough animation. It's not, there's no textures on anything or anything. It's just geometry. It's a hardware render. But you can see what I'm going for with the scene. That's the character. She's running along a platform and she's being shot at. So there's like tracer fire all around her. And she runs to the end of the platform and jumps. But she's escaping from something. No, we all do that. But But you can see how these things come together. First you model something, and then you build a rig for it, and then you can animate it. So what ends up happening is, if you can imagine something, you can make it, because you learn all the things you need to know. And that's why I always say, no matter what it is you like to do, know what some of those other disciplines around you are doing. And the more you know about it, the more valuable you are as a potential employee. Because if you can do more than one thing, you're obviously more valuable than somebody who can't. So even if a particular discipline is not something you're interested in or excited about or want to do it for a living, the fact that you know how to do it makes you a more valuable potential employee. So no matter what class you're in, even if you're not crazy about it, try to learn it, try to understand it, because it could be the difference between you versus somebody else who gets the job. So approach every discipline like, hey, this is interesting and it affects me. I should pay attention and learn it, even though I'm not, maybe I don't want to do this for a living, but it's good that I know how to do that. Sorry, I thought I saw a question. Yes, go ahead.
I have a question about parenting. If you wanted, so you said you can only have one parent, but can you make a group of parents?
Yes, absolutely. You can have parents within parents. You can have groups within groups. Because if you think about it, imagine I'm a hierarchy, right? That's the way I move. So if I move my shoulders, my elbows and my wrists have to move because they're in the hierarchy of my arm. When I move my elbow, my wrist and my fingers have to move. When I move my fingers, each of those has to move, right? When my spine goes this way, can my arms go a different direction? They have to move with my spine, right? There's just no way I can leave them behind. Wherever my spine goes, my arms have to go. And in terms of my hips, where my hips go, that's where my spine goes, right? I can't go a different direction. So wherever my hips go, my spine goes. Wherever my spine goes, my arms go. So you start to see the hierarchies within hierarchies that contain movement. So you just got to figure out what that is, and you can make anything move. Not necessarily layers in a visual sense, but layers in terms of functionality, absolutely. Because I'm moving my arms, but not my hips right now. But now I'm moving my hips and my arms. So inherently, physically, there's a layer or a hierarchy to the hierarchy. Does that make sense? Multiple parents of different layers within the hierarchy, yes. You can't have two parents at the same level. It's kind of like the military. You know, generals tell colonels what to do, colonels tell captains what to do, captains tell lieutenants what to do. If you've got two lieutenants, you can't.
Let's say like you have a model, so like the body is the main parent, and then you have like the limbs as different layers.
Well, what you're doing there though is you're trying to make the body the thing that's child or parent of the skeleton that makes it go. And that's a different process. It's called skinning, and that's where you literally assign values to each vertice on an object and how closely they follow the joint that's in charge. So those are two different things. Think of the skeleton and how the skeleton moves, that's the hierarchy part. Getting the skin to move with the skeleton, that's an association thing. And that is linked to history. It's a good question, but when you get to those classes, it'll make more sense. Yeah, but it is pretty cool. Good questions, though. I like that you guys are asking this stuff. It means you understand what it is we're talking about today. All right, so make sure you get that skill check banged out. Again, that's the skill check for lecture 5, and which I think all the skill checks for this week are due on the 16th. Am I right? Okay, so make sure you get all those guys done by the 16th, and I'm pretty sure the 18th is the due date for the weekly turn-in. Now, one thing I always suggest is make sure at the beginning of each week, take a look at what the week turn-in is, because each week there's a turn-in. Look at it now. Don't wait until just a few days before to figure, oh, wow, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. You know, at the beginning of the week, look at what's going to be due at the end of the week. Find out in advance, because you can start working on stuff. Even while you're working on the skill checks, take a break from the skill check and work on your assignment. Work on it all week long. Don't wait till, okay, my skill checks are all done. Now I guess I'm going to start on my week 2 turn-in at this instance. Don't wait till then. Start working now. You know, you've got time now. Don't wait till the end or you get into panic mode, and that very, very seldom goes well.
Is there a way to get the push tire to rotate around its own axis but all at the same time?
Yes, there is, but not with what I've shown you so far today. Yep, you're going to have to get into the use of some constraints in order to get that kind of thing going, which is, again, some more fun and interesting stuff. Okay, absolutely. That's actually the description of my job. Believe it or not, that's my thing. Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, I will let you struggle a little bit, because through struggle, that's how you learn. If I answer you too quickly and I don't let you work at all for it, it doesn't help you at all. You'll love me for it, but it doesn't help you as much in your growth. And I take that seriously. I would rather you hate me and be great at this than the other way around. It's frustrating. All you have to be missing is one, but we'll figure it out in just a second. Any other questions? You guys pretty good? All right, awesome. So get those skill checks done. Start working on your week 2 turn in. Start looking at the video for what we're asking for. Start looking over the self-grade and see what we're asking for, and start modeling those assets, because you're making 5 of them this time. If I know right, I think it's 3 level 1s and 2 level 2s, if I remember correctly. So you're making a fair number of objects. Don't wait till too late. All righty, guys, thank you very much. I will see you on Tuesday, and we will get into some more fun stuff. Yeah, always fun stuff.
Is there a little bird in the room? Like, periodically give me a sound.
There is a little bird.
Chirping.
That's my parrot. My little parrot. That's funny that they can hear that.
I know.
I'm the textile. That's what I'm doing.